Have you ever wondered what the lives of the poorest people in Victorian London looked like? The ones abandoned by society, living cramped on the steps of workhouses, struggling every day to survive, begging from those in the same plight, enduring bone-chilling cold and hunger that we can hardly imagine. Today's video will open the door to that world, where every step, every street is filled with tragic yet vibrant stories. Before we get lost in the dark alleys of Victorian London, take a moment to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any fascinating historical secrets, and you can join me until the end of the video to fully explore this haunting yet incredibly valuable story. Imagine you're sitting there, eyes wide open in the dark, back stiff from the cold steps, and right after this, we will step together into the real lives of the creepers in Victorian London. Brace yourself, because what you're about to see will make you both shiver and unable to look away. Early morning in St. Giles is unlike anywhere you have ever known. There is no golden sunlight streaming through windows, no bird song, no rich aroma of coffee, only the cold steps, damp stone slabs, and the soft breaths of people just waking from a half-sleeping, half-dreaming night. You curl up in your thin coat, trying to hold on to the faint warmth from the elderly woman Mary beside you. Her face has been eroded by poverty, deep wrinkles etched like ancient cliffs standing before the sea, yet her eyes still glimmer with a stubborn, resilient light. The two of you do not speak much, merely huddle together as the only way to survive the bone-chilling cold of early winter London. You try to stretch your legs, but your body is accustomed to persistent aches. Even with your eyes closed, you do not sleep fully. Every gust of wind slipping through the gaps between the boards, every sound of a distant horse-drawn carriage on the street startles you. Sleep on the workhouse steps does not bring real rest. It is a half-awake, half-dreaming state, where the body is in constant tension and the mind is always alert. "My legs ache so much I can hardly feel them," Mary murmurs. You reply softly, almost to reassure yourself, "That's better." In this world, feeling pain is more valuable than complete numbness. At least you still know you exist. A cup of tea, even if it is just reused, becomes a precious treasure. It does not fill your rumbling stomach, but it chases away the cold that is seeped into your bones, creating a rare moment of comfort. You watch Elizabeth, the oldest woman in the group, rising with slow but steady steps, pulling along Sarah's little child, whose mother works at a nearby cafe. Leaving the child here is part of the survival agreement. Every gesture, every word is a fragile connection between people living on the margins of society. Every breath the child takes is a heartbeat of hope, however small and fragile. The life of the creepers is not just a fight against hunger and cold. It is a mental battle with invisibility, with being forgotten by society. Every glance from passers-by, every sound of patrolling police, or mocking laughter from the well-off reminds you that here, existence is never guaranteed. Every step, every movement must be considered carefully. One small mistake, one moment of negligence, and everything you possess could be taken away instantly. You remember once being a tailor, having a small house, knowing the feeling of lying in a soft bed after a long day of work. Now, those memories feel distant, like a dream belonging to someone else. Yet, no matter how cruel the circumstances, this small community persists. Older beggars like Burke, though not wealthy, still bring news and occasionally a piece of bread, creating small pockets of relief in this harsh world. Kindness is not taken for granted. It is a precious gift, passed carefully like the old teapot you hold. Rain comes, and the world grows even harsher. Slippery steps, weakened bodies, and the fear of being soaked rise like a real nightmare. Yet you must go. You need boiling water for tea, a bit of food, or a small coin from the compassion of passers-by. Every seemingly simple action requires effort, cunning, and sometimes luck. Meanwhile, children, new to this harsh world, learn to survive from the community itself. They know how to move silently, when to retreat, how to seize every small moment of comfort. Every gesture, from sharing tea to holding one another against the cold, reflects an unspoken etiquette, a value system within a forgotten world. You look around, seeing others in the same plight. Some are lucky enough to find odd jobs, others still struggle day by day on the steps. All are bound by hardship, but also by resilience, by small moments of humanity that city life often overlooks. Each day is not just survival. It is a series of mental trials, a lesson in patience, endurance, and maintaining a shred of dignity in extreme conditions. Finally, you realize that it is this connection, sometimes just a touch on the shoulder, a cup of tea, a quiet word, that gives you a sense of existence. The outside world, with its wealth and power, may overlook you, but here, on the cold steps of St. Giles, you still belong to a community, still are acknowledged, even if only for a fleeting moment. And that is what provides the mental strength to keep moving, crawling, surviving, and seeking hope in the darkness of Victorian London. The rain had eased, falling only in light drizzles, leaving the streets damp, puddles reflecting the gray light of the early morning sky. But even with the rain stopping, the cold still seeped deep into the bones. Wet clothes clung to the body like a second skin, making every movement difficult. You stand up, curling your legs together, feeling the warmth from the child Mary has just pulled close. Small as it is, the child possesses a strange acuity, knowing how to seek warmth and a safe spot in every moment. It is this acuity, combined with survival instinct, that allows these children to endure a harsh world that even adults struggle to withstand. Elizabeth stands near you, eyes fixed on the shadows of people moving along the street. "Watch out," she warns, her voice cold but alert. In this world, vigilance is not a choice, but a survival skill. Every passerby could be a danger, a gentleman giving a dismissive glance, a workhouse officer checking a list, or even a higher-ranking beggar in the street hierarchy you have never fully understood. None of them truly care how you exist, as long as you do not cause trouble. You shuffle along behind Mary, hugging the wall to avoid curious eyes, those eyes always seeking opportunity. Every step reminds you that you no longer have a choice. Survival is the only goal. On the way to Drury Lane, where a coffee seller often gives free hot water, every sound becomes pronounced. Wheels rolling over cobblestones, distant market cries, wind whistling through rooftops. Everything serves as a reminder that you exist on the edge of a wealthy city you were never part of. When you arrive, your group is greeted by a rare warm light. The coffee seller, a middle-aged gentleman with compassionate eyes, smiles as you offer an empty cup. A cup of hot water is poured, steam rising into the cold air. It is not much, but more precious than any sumptuous meal remembered from distant past. You take a sip, feeling warmth fill your stomach, and even if only for a fleeting moment, it strengthens your spirit. But rest does not last long. Elizabeth reminds you, "Let's go, there's still much to do." Crawling, as she often calls it, is not just a nickname. It is a way of life, a way of moving when the body is exhausted from hunger, cold, and illness. You stoop low, following Mary and the child, each step heavy with the weight of your body, but you cannot stop. Everyone in the group bears their own wounds. Hands calloused from labor, eyes dimming from lack of light, backs aching from lying on cold steps. At a street corner, you see a familiar face, another crawler, collecting discarded tea leaves from a nearby house. They smile, not from joy, but because sharing is the only way to survive. Each old tea leaf, every crumb of bread, is a small piece of existence. A small gesture, yet more valuable than any material wealth, for it brings warmth, life, and a bit of comfort in a long, harsh day. The group continues moving, weaving through narrow streets, avoiding scornful gazes, dodging passing crowds. Elizabeth always goes ahead, alert to every step, every sound. The little girl, Sarah's child, seems to have adapted to this pace of life, standing close to Mary, her head resting on the adult's body to find warmth. Watching how she responds to her surroundings, you realize that adaptation is a survival skill, more vital than any lesson in books. The drizzle returns. Small puddles reflect the pale yellow light of street lamps, creating a space both still and eerie. You pause for a moment, observing the people around. Other beggars, a few solitary women, other children seeking warmth, each a living story, but also proof of the city's harshness. A few gentlemen pass by, ignoring your presence, or shake their heads in disapproval at the soaked clothes. They do not see you as human. You are merely an obstacle in their landscape. You tell yourself that every step, every moment of survival is a victory. Ignoring the aches, the cold, and the hunger, you learn to divide time. The next hour after that, each moment survived to avoid collapsing. These small victories are all you can hold on to. They are survival in a world where the larger society seems to have forgotten you. As the day brightens, more people appear on the streets. Some familiar faces head to work, others search for food, and your group weaves among them, carefully controlling every breath. Every step combines caution, survival, skill, and luck. A strong gust of wind blows from the corner of the street, making you shiver. But Mary pulls the child closer, reminding you that closeness and connection are vital. Children, though small, understand that survival does not rely solely on physical strength. They learn to observe, to stay silent, to seek warmth from others. Thanks to them, a part of hope persists among those abandoned on these steps. You watch the eyes of Elizabeth, Mary, and the others, realizing that in this harsh world, connection, sharing, and a bit of kindness are the only things that keep you from collapsing. The day is still long. You take a sip of tea, feeling the warmth spread. Tomorrow will come, with rain, challenges, and the next moments of survival. But for now, you have made it through the first morning of the day. You are still alive, and you still have hope. For even on the cold steps of St. Giles, in the harshness of Victorian London, small victories, shared moments, and survival are still reasons to keep moving forward. The brief moment of calm after the rain, though fleeting, brought a rare and dizzying feeling, as if the whole world were holding its breath to recover before the next storm. You stand still, feeling the cold seep through every fiber, your soaked clothes clinging to your body, as if flesh and fabric have merged into one. Mary beside you, eyes red, shifts slightly to avoid aggravating the creaking joints. The child sleeps on her shoulder, breathing evenly and warmly, as if this fragile life quietly reminds you that sometimes merely existing is a victory. You watch the others on the steps. They are wet and tired, their postures humble, quietly sharing every bit of warmth and crumb of bread. No one speaks much. Words have become a luxury in a world where cold, hunger, and fatigue are daily enemies. Elizabeth, standing nearby, eyes always vigilant, seems to scan every movement around, distinguishing friend, potential foe, and those indifferent to your presence. In this damp air, vigilance becomes instinct, the only thing keeping you alive, helping you locate yourself among the drifting masses in a harsh city. Mary begins to recount her past, her story gradually revealing pieces of a life torn apart by poverty and illness. Arthur, her husband, a tailor with eyes perpetually red from smoke and dust, taught her small skills that later became a lifeline for her and her son. But loss was inevitable. Her eyesight faded, her shoulders grew heavy as she became a burden within her own family, her former efforts and skills no longer valued. The lessons of life on the streets of London, where poverty and disease prevail, were not always fair. Sometimes it was simply a hopeless struggle to avoid vanishing completely. She tells of the early days when everything seemed empty and aimless. London's streets, bustling but without enough space for the weary and hungry, were even less welcoming to a woman with poor eyesight and a proud boy. Every step was a challenge, every stumble a reminder that the city waits for no one. Yet Mary refused to yield. She learned to move between steps, weave through crowds, find temporary shelter, relying on an informal network of the poor, where information about free bread, safe refuges, or indifferent police was passed from person to person like a living treasure. The boy sleeps in Mary's arms, but in that sleep, his eyes occasionally flutter open as if trying to understand what is happening around him. His pride, despite hunger and a frail body, does not allow him to beg or perform tasks he deems beneath him. Mary watches him with a gaze mixed with disappointment and admiration. Pride is something other children may have lost, yet it preserves a part of his humanity in a world full of oppression. Elizabeth remarks, her eyes filled with both compassion and judgment. No one has the energy for pure empathy here, and every emotion is tested by harsh reality. Mary recounts the long nights when the boy cried from hunger and exhaustion. His tears, small yet charged with all remaining energy, seem to remind that life must be sustained even under the worst conditions. The early days at St. Martin's, where they found temporary shelter, each step and stumble taught them lessons in survival. Many times they had to abandon hope of finding a room, accepting life as invisible shadows on the streets, simply to wake the next morning and continue. Listening to Mary, every small detail becomes significant. Her hands calloused from labor, her feet bleeding through worn boots, the boy's pride despite hunger, the invisible support network among the poor, and the small victories in finding shelter or a modest meal. These victories, though tiny, are reasons to keep moving, to avoid collapsing on the cold streets where the city seems to have forgotten you. Another moment passes as Mary shrugs, eyes on the child. My son used to cry at night. The first few weeks, no more. A simple statement, yet it carries a complex system of emotions: hope, disappointment, perseverance, and the determination to protect what remains. You realize that living in poverty is not just confronting material deprivation, but also learning to preserve every fragment of remaining character, every shred of dignity, every moment of human connection. Outside, London streets continue to bustle, but for Mary and your group, each quiet moment becomes an opportunity for mental rest, to breathe, to recharge for the next steps. This space, whether a damp stair or a temporary corner, remains the only place where life and pride endure. You understand that sometimes in the harshest conditions, humans fight not only to survive, but also to retain what belongs to themselves, even if it is just a small light in the darkness. And when the weak morning light reflects on the small puddles in the street, you realize that existing is not just living, it is winning each moment, holding on to what is most precious within yourself, in a world where poverty, disease, and harsh society constantly loom. The next steps, though exhausting, are proof of mental strength and pride, showing that even on the cold steps of St. Giles, one can still find a glimmer of hope and human worth. The initial fear subsided, but the air remained thick, suffocating with tension and vigilance. Mary tightened her grip on her son's arm, eyes scanning the steps as if anticipating every possible scenario. The drunken men stood there, minds still reeling and behavior irrational, yet their strength and numbers left no room for complacency. Mary's son, though merely a skinny, ragged boy, appeared as a stark contrast, calm, self-possessed, and proud, completely overshadowing his frail appearance. You realize that in moments of survival, attitude, confidence, and the ability to make an impression can sometimes matter more than all material factors. The drunk stepped closer, yet the boy maintained his stance, his gaze sharp and unyielding. Even when blocked, he did not falter. Every gesture, every word was calculated, even if just a survival reflex. I am employed, sir, just taking a break, he replied with a refined, composed tone that nearly made you forget he was only 15. The fabricated statement was specific enough, yet convincing enough to make the drunk men hesitate, confused. You glance at Mary and see a flicker of pride in her eyes, a place usually dominated by worry and helplessness. This is the moment when pride, not strength or numbers, becomes a survival weapon. Meanwhile, Sarah stands nearby, still holding her young daughter, eyes following every movement. She knows well that a single lapse could cause everything to collapse. The tension evident on her face, the trembling of her hands, the rapid breaths, all tell a story of constant vigilance, sleepless nights, and endless days searching for food and shelter. She knows that in this world, crying has become a luxury that cannot be bought. Hope, safety, and dignity are measured by every action and every word. The boy continues, with pride and composure so precise that the drunks are unsure whether to laugh or get angry. I assist my uncle with literary work. He is completing a book on the economic state of the modern city, he says, inventing details sharp enough to make the ringleader hesitate. You notice something remarkable. Confidence does not come from strength, but from positioning oneself higher in the mind of others. Every word, every tone, every glance creates an invisible protective layer, making those around uneasy. A moment passes, then Mary whispers to you, "Stay close. They're coming near." No one moves. Everyone keeps their gaze on the stone steps, maintaining a safe distance while preparing to react instantly if the situation spirals out of control. You realize that here, survival is not just about moving or avoiding collisions, but also about reading others' psychology, sensing the slightest changes, and responding promptly. As the group of drunken youths approaches, you notice their reactions are entirely random, sometimes insults, sometimes sudden generosity, and occasionally meaningless pranks. Each situation becomes a lesson for your group: how to adjust behavior, maintain distance, and use words and demeanor to create an impression. The boy, with his calmness and refined voice, turns potential threats into confused, flustered subjects. This is the power of intellect and pride, a survival tool that cannot be bought with money or status. Elizabeth stands silently, observing and signaling with furrowed brows, tilted heads, or whispered words. Life experience on the streets has taught her that sometimes silence is the best way to protect oneself and the weaker. You feel the invisible bond among the characters: Mary, her son, Sarah, and her child, Elizabeth, and you, each playing an important, though small, role in maintaining the balance between danger and safety. This tense moment also reveals other aspects of life: the skill in coping with poverty, the ability to seize every small opportunity, from maintaining fragile reputation in the coffee shop, receiving leftover food, to signing up in the hop fields. Every choice is a test, and survival depends not only on physical ability, but also on intelligence, adaptability, and pride. Mary once said, "My son would never agree, too proud to pick hops." But now, pride is no longer a luxury. It becomes essential to live, negotiate, and survive while preserving dignity. The noise gradually fades as the drunken group departs, leaving a tense silence, yet temporary safety. You look around, noticing the fatigue, but also the quiet confidence in every small action. Mary gently holding her son, the little girl pressed to her mother, Sarah sighing in relief, and Elizabeth standing like a steadfast wall, protecting all from the outside world. This is not a grand victory, but a precious moment: survival, solidarity, and pride persisting in poverty. You understand that in these moments, all skills, intellect, and resilient spirit are tested. It is a lesson in survival. Every gesture, every word, every glance carries life or death value. It is proof that in the harsh world of St. Giles, life is measured not only by food, clothing, or shelter, but also by the ability to maintain dignity, make an impression, and protect those you love, even when everything else seems to collapse. And when everything temporarily settles, you sense one thing: in this harsh world, pride, intelligence, and subtlety in survival become the only things that cannot be taken away, cannot be bought at any price. This is the fragile yet vivid hope, where every moment, however small, carries meaning for survival and shapes the future of resilient people on the workhouse steps. Elizabeth placed the package on the old wooden table, examining each small item as if discovering a precious treasure. The faint lingering aroma of stale bread, fibrous meat, and shriveled vegetables made the group sigh softly, both hungry and grateful. Mary sat nearby, quietly stroking her daughter's hair, eyes full of worry and concern. Sarah stood, taking a deep breath, trying to appear bright in front of her young daughter's innocent eyes, but inside, everything remained tense. Every piece of bread, every tea leaf, however seemingly worthless, was part of the daily miracle, helping them survive in a vast and merciless city where the poor lived off scraps from the tables of the wealthy. James sat down on the floor, hands trembling from the earlier confrontation with the drunken men, yet he carefully watched the loaf of bread. "We are luckier than many out there," he said, his voice low, tinged with irony. "These seemingly worthless crumbs are enough to sustain a person for a whole day." Elizabeth nodded, sipping a cup of tea. Though only used leaves, the warm flavor brought a small measure of comfort to her body. In this moment, everyone realized that survival was not only about food and clothing, but also about precious pauses where their souls could breathe and feel their existence. Mary's son bent down, picking up a piece of bread, chewing slowly as if learning to value every fragment of food. The boy was no longer proud as before, no longer performing for the drunken men, yet his eyes still radiated intelligence and keen observation. Every gesture was deliberate, but this time it was not intended to impress. It was a lesson in humility, in how to survive under limited circumstances. Sarah smiled faintly, sensing simple joy. The child was learning how to survive and how to cherish every moment and every piece of food that they could call their own. Elizabeth spoke, her voice gentle yet serious. "We can't just rely on scraps anymore. If there's a chance to go to the hop fields, we must prepare fully. Strength is more precious than anything." Mary looked at her, nodding, though her heart still hesitated. 1 pound, she thought silently, may seem small, but for them, it was the only ticket out of the endless cycle of poverty: a safe place to stay, a few decent clothes, and an address for employment. Sarah hugged her child tightly, feeling the weight of responsibility, knowing that every saved penny was an effort for survival. A gentle breeze blew, stirring the thin fabric curtains hanging in front of the workhouse window. You sat against the wall, hands still slightly cold from damp clothes. But for the first time in weeks, your mind was not solely focused on hunger or present danger. A glimmer of hope appeared. 3 weeks in the hop fields, sufficient health, and a bit of luck might help them gather the necessary money. Not wealth or glory, just a room, a bed, and a chance to return to some part of the world they once knew. Mary's son looked at you, eyes lighting up, and for the first time you noticed a subtle change in his demeanor, no longer performing for outsiders, but showing inner commitment, ready to take action if the opportunity arose. "If a real chance comes," he said, voice firm, "I will do it." Mary smiled, both proud and anxious. This small change, seemingly insignificant to the outside world, was a major step in their harsh life. The next hours passed in silence, only the sounds of bread being chewed and Elizabeth whispering as she organized the food. Sarah watched the child sleep peacefully in her arms, feeling the steady rhythm of its breath, realizing that survival was not only avoiding hunger and disease, but also maintaining fundamental human connections: care, trust, and love. The food scraps, the used tea leaves, the small smiles, all were evidence of human adaptability and survival in a merciless world. James stood, rubbing his wrists, looking out the window. "We need to plan for tomorrow," he said. "If possible, we must preserve maximum strength. Every step, every decision is important." Mary nodded, looking at her son, still slightly trembling, but with a determined gaze. Coordination, patience, and the ability to react quickly became survival tools, more important than any advice or moral guidance charity organizations could offer. The atmosphere on the workhouse steps grew quiet but meaningful. Every individual, from Sarah, Mary, her son, Elizabeth, to you, understood that even a small opportunity could change their fate. And hope, fragile and easily broken, still persisted, threading through fear, hunger, and long nights spent amid London's rain and wind. This feeling was no illusion. It was a driving force for survival, reminding everyone that no matter how poor, people could maintain dignity, intelligence, and the ability to shape a small part of their future. As night fell, the group sat around the remaining package. They did not eat excessively, taking just enough to maintain strength. But more importantly, they shared small stories, quiet laughter, and comfort that no material wealth could buy. Elizabeth sipped her tea, reminding herself that each moment like this was a miracle. Survival was not just food and clothing, but connection, hope, and pride preserved day by day, hour by hour. The warmth from the cup of tea spread around, seeping into cold fingers and weary bodies. With every sip, you felt your heartbeat slow, tension gradually melting away, and the group seemed reconnected to a fragment of the normal world. Elizabeth stirred the tea in the pot, her face focused, but her eyes still sparkling with satisfaction, as if she were conducting an important ritual. The faint aroma of tea, slightly bitter, slightly sweet, have mingled with the lingering smells of bread and meat in the air, making this moment more sacred than any meal you had ever experienced. Sarah sat down, placing the child on her lap, eyes following Elizabeth with a smile that was both tired and grateful. The food, though only scraps, had now become a symbol of safety and care. A small meal did more than stave off hunger. It reminded them that survival could go hand in hand with compassion and thoughtfulness, even in the harshest circumstances. Mary's son looked at you and the adults around, his gaze less closed off, as if learning to share the burden with others. A subtle yet important step. He had realized the power of collective action and mutual care. Elizabeth gently poured each spoonful of tea into small cups, careful not to spill. Each cup was a gift, not for its material value, but for its symbolic meaning. A courtesy, a reminder that even in poverty, they could maintain a portion of civilized life. You raised your cup of tea, inhaling deeply, savoring the warm scent. Though only boiling water steeped with used leaves, it conveyed a sense of preparation, respect, and a small measure of simple happiness. Mary's son bowed his head slightly, took a sip, then turned to his mother. "See, just a little is enough to make things feel better," he said, his voice cautious but full of meaning. Mary looked at him, eyes filled with both worry and hope. After long days wandering the steps and streets, she now saw a faint glimmer, the belief that they could make a difference, however small, in their own lives. Outside the window, footsteps and the sounds of traffic faded as dusk settled, bathing London in a pale orange light. Every figure, every shop, every street seemed like a quiet challenge, demanding focus and caution to avoid trouble and stay safe. You lifted the teapot, gently shaking it to check the stability of its cracks, then set it down carefully, trying to maintain balance as people moved. Every small action, from sharing bread to brewing tea, carried survival meaning, controlling emotions, managing resources, preserving strength, and maintaining human connection in a hostile environment. James sighed, observing the group. Complexions regained some color from the meal, yet he knew that long, strenuous challenges lay ahead. He looked at Mary's son and noticed something rare. The boy had learned to be proactive, to observe, and to understand that hope must be paired with action. A sense of responsibility had been kindled, fragile yet strong enough to counter the despair lurking nearby. "Any news about the hop fields?" you asked, trying to keep your voice calm, though curiosity and hope stirred within. Mary's son glanced at you, their eyes meeting for a moment before looking away. It was discreet, yet carried a message. Opportunity was coming, but preparation and focus were needed. For the first time, he spoke of signing up for the new work without bitterness, without skepticism. Mary and Elizabeth exchanged glances, realizing that internal change was beginning to manifest in concrete action. Elizabeth pressed lightly on the stirring stick, watching the water turn a pale color. "Done," she said, her voice even but certain. "The brewing time is short. The leaves are used, but still enough flavor and caffeine to lift the spirits." Sarah smiled at the child, sensing small joy as she sipped the tea, as if survival and hope were intertwined in every careful action. Outside the window, light rain began to fall, droplets pattering on the tin roofs and streets. The rain wetted the steps, reminding everyone of life's fragility. A small accident, a misstep, or a spilled precious item could change everything. You gripped the teapot tightly, feeling the weight and value of every moment. Everything, from each crumb of bread to the hot cup of tea, became a symbol of survival, hope, and resilience. As the meal ended, everyone fell silent, but in each mind arose a sense of temporary safety. Bodies nourished, spirits bolstered, and preparation for the upcoming opportunity already underway. Mary's son stood, shrugging lightly, no longer aggressive, as if signaling that even in poverty, self-respect and the capacity for change still existed. They knew tomorrow would bring another challenge, but tonight, amid the rain and the dim lights of Drury Lane, everyone could breathe, see each other, and hold on to a fragile yet precious hope. In this quiet moment, you realized that survival was not just about food or shelter, it was the small gestures of care, the sharing, the collective spirit, the ability to seize opportunities even if small. Every cup of tea, every scrap of meat, every exchanged glance, each reminded them that perseverance and compassion were the most powerful weapons, enough to endure in a ruthless yet full of potential London. On the worn steps of the workhouse, the last light of day cast a pale golden hue over the group, both warm and a reminder of the fragility of time. Each person held their small portion of food, and it seemed that these crumbs of bread and apples kept the group together, like an invisible thread linking wandering lives. Elizabeth sat upright, eyes following every movement, gently reminding anyone who took more than their share. There was no rush or pressure, just a slow, solemn rhythm in sharing, as if this were a folk ritual repeated over generations, a magic to maintain order amid chaos. Mary's son, initially timid and withdrawn, now observed the group around him with a fresh gaze, a mix of curiosity and caution. When discussing the deposit with his mother, his voice lowered, but no longer carried doubt or arrogance. "She owes us for watching the boy," he said, calculated, but also as an acknowledgement that fair exchanges could create power and hope. Mary looked at her son, eyes wide with surprise and worry. No one here expected miracles. Everything was the result of wise decisions and the ability to seize opportunity. Elizabeth emphasized the necessity of each small step, first the deposit, then heading out to the fields, and only then thinking of other expenses. Grand dreams were a luxury in this context. They were dangerous only if they distracted from immediate needs. The tea brewed quickly, but its warmth and slight caffeine content were enough to dispel lingering fatigue. James whispered about tonight's church service, where St. Andrew's would distribute bread, and the information quickly spread, creating a small wave of hope within the group. Though one had to sit through long and sometimes unreasonable sermons, exchanging them for bread and shelter from the rain was an easy and necessary trade, a testament to the harsh realities of street life. When Elizabeth set down the teapot, Mary's son hesitated a few seconds before answering the question about attending church. Pride had once prevented him from participating in charitable activities, but now a small victory of practicality, bread, and a chance to maintain hope prompted him to change his decision. "I'll go," he said, voice both firm and cautious, as if testing himself. This small change, modest though it was, marked the first step toward accepting responsibility and collaboration, a survival lesson taught by the steps themselves. Evening spread, and other figures climbed the steps seeking temporary shelter. Some were familiar faces, others mere shadows passing by, but all shared stories of loss, illness, broken families, and the cruel arithmetic of poverty in London. Hannah, a 40-year-old woman with a persistent cough, sat down. Her presence was both a reminder of the dangers of illness and proof of sharing limited space. When the news of St. Andrew's church bread was confirmed, the group realized that even in poverty there were small opportunities to survive and maintain hope. Arches, gaps under bridges, and old steps became more precious than ever. "They won't bother us here," Elizabeth said confidently, like a small commander guiding the survivors through daily risks. The conversation quickly shifted to survival news. Which parishes were offering help, which areas had increased police presence, which inns accepted guests without full prepayment. Every piece of information was important, every story a survival lesson, and people learned to leverage collective knowledge to endure the night. Suddenly, Mary's son disappeared. Everyone remained silent, watching while your heartbeat quickened. 20 minutes later, he returned holding a bundle of newspaper. Inside was a slightly bruised apple and half of an old meat pie. Mary was suspicious, but the boy explained, "Not stealing. I helped unload a cart at the market. Payment in kind." It was an ordinary transaction, but its significance went far beyond material value. In this world, trading labor for food while preserving dignity was a small yet important step, reinforcing a sense of independence and personal responsibility. The boy carefully divided the pie, each portion equal, though so small it seemed barely enough for one person. Elizabeth watched, smiling, and you sensed a subtle joy. These small victories, though trivial, were laying the foundation for survival and enduring hope. Acts that seemed ordinary, breaking an apple, sharing a pie, brewing tea, now felt sacred, reminding that in poverty, compassion, caution, and observational skills were the strongest weapons. The scent of old meat pie mingled with the gentle aroma of apple in the cool evening air, creating a rare moment of calm. You savored each bite, noticing the difference from typical charity bread, real flavor, care in every detail, and a small pride in knowing that each person's simple actions contributed to collective survival. Mary's son looked at everyone's faces, naturally flushed with pride at a simple compliment from Elizabeth. Elizabeth's approval, rare but precious, made him understand the value of effort and patience. James whispered about the opportunity to help at the market tomorrow, eyes not fixed on anyone but full of determination. You nodded, realizing that every opportunity, no matter how small, could make a significant difference. The hop fields, scraps of meat pie, and apple all combined to form a delicate survival network where every action had meaning, and survival was no longer left to chance, but was the result of determination, wisdom, and communal spirit. In ruthless London, every meal, every cup of tea, every small action became a victory, however minor. Yet it was these victories that made the difference between the survivors and the lost. Pieces of meat pie, apples, broken cups of tea, all symbols of hope, compassion, and resilience, reminding that even in darkness and poverty, people could find ways to connect, share, and preserve dignity. The rain continued to fall, each heavy, icy drop seeping through the holes in worn shoes, soaking tattered clothing. Yet inside the church, a warm atmosphere enveloped everyone, like a temporary shield from the harshness of London. The heavy wooden doors closed, keeping the storm outside, and the scent of candles, wax, and damp stone from the floor mingled, creating a strange aroma, both safe and a reminder of the fragility of one's existence. You sat down on the hard wooden pew, feeling your body gradually recover from the damp chill outside. Your clothes were still wet, but a sense of relief washed over you, for here you had shelter and at least a portion of food. The people in the church busied themselves with familiar rituals. The rustle of robes, quiet footsteps on the stone floor, and murmured prayers created a soundscape both steady and oppressive. Looking around, you noticed the subtle stratification that needed no explanation. The front pews held those with homes, but economic difficulties, clean and well dressed, adhering to the parish's standards. The middle section was for regular beggars, familiar with the bread distributions, while the very back was occupied by your group, ragged, soaking wet, and deemed too hopeless to be fully accepted even among the poor. Yet today, thanks to Elizabeth's decisiveness, all were allowed in. Elizabeth stepped forward, her gaze still commanding, despite aches and wet clothing. She not only protected the group, but taught them an important survival lesson. Pride and practicality do not always conflict if one knows when to yield and when to stand firm. She goes with us, or none of us go, Elizabeth said, softly but firmly, making the group feel steadier, as if infused with invisible strength. The hard wooden pews reminded you of the steps outside, your simple, rough shelter. Here, everything was standardized, orderly, and regulated. You looked at Mary's son, sitting upright, eyes fixed on the bread with no hesitation or fear. This small but important change demonstrated that sometimes practical actions, however modest, could alter perception and outlook. Around you, people carefully observed one another. The women from the charity sat in the front rows, neatly hatted and cloaked, adhering to their standards, yet the distance between them and the beggars was clear. No direct judgment was spoken, but gestures, glances, and seating positions revealed the difference. Kindness here always came with conditions. You realized that surviving in London was a series of small victories, learning to accept compromises, set aside pride, and seize every opportunity to endure. The candle and gaslight cast flickering glimmers on the damp stone floor. Each shadow stretched, carrying with the story of a human life in the dim light. You heard Mary whisper to her son, guiding him toward practicality. The bread here was more precious than all they had endured, and this warm moment was worth every effort to obtain. The boy nodded quietly, eyes suddenly alight with a quiet joy. For the first time, he felt the power of a small victory, not a miracle, but the result of wise calculation and decisive action. Hannah, sitting at the back, could barely stay still due to her persistent cough. Elizabeth gently placed a hand on her shoulder, conveying reassurance, reminding her that their presence in the church today was a victory. Through unity and careful planning, they not only had bread, but also a temporary shelter, a safe moment amid the rain and cold. The prayers began, not too loud, but enough for everyone to feel the temporary rhythm of a community guided by discipline, rules, and conditional charity. You realize that in harshness, people still found spaces for hope and survival. Small portions of food, acts of care, and opportunities to participate in a structured society, however small, all became precious victories. Mary's son sat quietly, chewing bread, occasionally glancing around. Elizabeth's discreet guidance, coupled with experience living on the steps, had taught him how to choose, observe, and seize opportunities. In the warm light, every breath of those present carried more meaning. The rain outside still fell, but inside the church you felt a rare, precious moment of peace, where your existence and that of those around you was affirmed. Bread in hand, damp clothing, you felt the stark contrast between two worlds, the systematic chill of the workhouse and the conditional yet valuable charity of the church. Once again, you realized that survival was not merely about overcoming hunger or cold, but about adjusting oneself and recognizing the value of small victories and nurturing hope through concrete, however modest, actions. Here in St. Andrew's Church, candlelight, the scent of wax, stone, and bread created a warm layer, temporarily shielding against London's harshness, and you understood that every safe moment was a victory. Each piece of bread, each gesture, each glance contributed to shaping a day of survival, a step forward in a world where only those who calculated, observed, and seized opportunities could endure. And in this moment, you allowed yourself to savor the flavor of hope, small, temporary, yet stronger than any rain or darkness outside. The rain outside still fell heavily, but inside the parish hall, the atmosphere seemed less harsh than the soaking streets. The pale yellow light from candles and gas lamps created shimmering patches on the stone floor, reflecting off tired but determined faces. You stood beside your group, eyes following Sarah and Agnes as they emerged from the side room with a bit of assistance from the stern woman in the society. The warmth of the people around, the scent of fresh bread and cheese, and the sense of temporary safety made you realize that this moment was a victory, a small victory, but immensely precious. Elizabeth stood near you, her expression still stern, but her gaze gentle, observing everyone's movements. She understood that survival was not just about having food or shelter from the rain, but also about protecting each other from society's invisible pressures. We have to keep the boy and the girl safe, she said softly, reminding the group that alongside the harshness of rules, there were responsibilities and humanity that needed to be carried out wisely. Mary's son, usually concerned only with meals or earning money, now stood quietly, eyes intently following Sarah, as if weighing every possibility. Sarah carried Agnes, moving past the scrutinizing gazes of the charity members, her pale face resolute. She understood that their concern came with conditions and moral standards of their own, standards she could not change but had to navigate carefully to protect the child. Each step she took on the stone floor carried a silent worry. Would they have enough courage to keep the child? Would anyone exert pressure to make her give up? Would the rain outside make everything worse upon returning? Elizabeth and your group followed closely, ready to intervene if needed. While the other members queued for bread, Mary's son stayed tucked at the back, eyes never leaving Sarah and Agnes. The urge to act, which rarely surfaced in him, now flared clearly. "I can," he began, his voice hesitant, as if surprised by this new sense of responsibility. When all eyes turned to him, he continued, "I can watch her somewhere else, not on the steps, if I have a place to take her." The suggestion, simple yet strong, seemed to open a new door for Sarah and Agnes, and for your group, a chance to turn survival authority into practical action. Sarah paused, eyes both surprised and thoughtful. She realized that this was not an empty promise, but a temporary solution with high feasibility. "If you have a safe place, I agree," she said, voice low and urgent, as if worried that time slipping by would forfeit this opportunity. Mary nodded, recognizing that discreet cooperation between your group and the boy was the best, least risky, and most effective course compared to arguing or openly resisting. The boy slowly nodded, eyes still focused on the adjoining room where Sarah and Agnes had been taken. Watching him, you realized that even the youngest, sometimes only concerned with personal survival, could learn about responsibility and compassion. Daily chores at the market, food exchanged for work, small acts of care, all had taught him that every action, no matter how minor, held value and impacted others. The woman from the Women's Society, dressed in a dark, stern gown, still stood near Sarah, eyes scrutinizing but no longer overwhelming. Something about the boy standing in front made her realize that today, no one could force Sarah to relinquish the child. Instead, a new relationship between those living on society's margins, based on mutual trust and practical calculation, was gradually forming. What were merely small victories today, a piece of bread, a temporary shelter, were now laying the groundwork for long-term change for the group and for children like Agnes. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside the hall, everything seemed temporarily at ease. Elizabeth gently placed her hand on Sarah's shoulder, as if to remind her that no one had to face this challenge alone. You stood nearby, realizing that victories did not come from miracles, but from cooperation, observation, and timely action. Mary's son, now standing like a proper guardian, no longer concerned with personal pride, he had recognized the true value of the ability to protect others. The pieces of bread in your bag, temporarily warm and dry, now carried more significance than mere food. They were symbols of survival, opportunity, and responsibility. Everyone in the group, from Elizabeth, Mary, Hannah to the boy, learned that survival was not just enduring hour by hour, but the ability to seize opportunities, turning small victories into larger steps in life. As Sarah carried Agnes back toward your group, her eyes both tired and resolute, you realized that the world could be oppressive and cold, yet there were still spaces where kindness, intelligence, and cooperation could flourish. Elizabeth, standing beside her, emphasized that this moment was not just about bread or temporary shelter, but about the ability to create change, however small, in a world seemingly indifferent to the most vulnerable. And in that moment, as everyone moved toward the exit, ready to step into the rain, you realized that each step, each decision, each unexpected offer from the boy all created a small network of survival and compassion. This was not a miracle, but the result of wisdom, observation, and practical courage. Your group had learned that in the harshest circumstances, victory is not always grand. Sometimes it is merely the safety of a child, a piece of bread, or the steadfastness of faith in one another. And so, amidst the cold London rain, in the pale yellow light of St. Andrew's Church, hope emerged from the smallest things, from the quiet victories you and your group had forged, with a silent belief that if acted wisely, each day could open a new chance to survive, a path beyond the bare steps you had long been familiar with. As you and your group gradually moved toward the steps of the workhouse, the scene before you made everyone sigh. The newcomers, not yet familiar with the unspoken rules of the camp, had taken the best positions near the doorway, where they could catch the most warmth from the walls and roof. They huddled together, curled up in their wet and tattered clothes, eyes blazing with despair, but also filled with hope. Hope that today they would find a tolerable spot, escape the cold wind, avoid the rain, and stave off the hunger that haunted them. This situation reminded you that the workhouse was not just a shelter, it was a survival arena, where those with no other choice had to fight for every inch of ground, every moment of safety. Hannah sighed, sticking out her tongue as if trying to expel her fatigue and the chill. She stared at the newcomers, realizing that if they didn't act quickly, their usual spot would be taken. "Someone's in our place," she said, voice a mix of surprise and irritation, pointing to the steps. You nodded, understanding that holding on to a temporary refuge was not just a matter of convenience, but a part of control, a fragment of identity remaining in this chaotic world. Elizabeth quickly recognized the need to reorganize the group. She silently lined everyone up, gently guiding them to avoid direct conflict, for a fight would bring nothing but wounds and unnecessary trouble. "We don't need to fight," she reminded them, voice soft yet firm, "but we also cannot lose our place." These words reflected how your group had learned to survive: resilient, skillful, and opportunistic, a delicate balance between survival and morality. William, still shy after being addressed by name, now became more proactive. He stepped toward the steps, eyes filled with determination but not aggression, just enough to mark the group's position. The name William seemed to grant him a new kind of power, not material but spiritual, the right to exist, the right to be respected as an individual. Watching him, you realize that in this world, names, identity, and small recognition of character were more precious than bread or temporary shelter. The new group occupying the space was unaware of this. They huddled, shivering, occasionally glancing at your group with curiosity tinged with caution. You saw Elizabeth's eyes, assessing every gesture, whether there was a risk of conflict, whether there was an opportunity for a tacit agreement, or whether they were willing to yield some territory to those more familiar. In a world where everything was a struggle for survival, the ability to read others' behavior became a vital skill. Mary stood beside William, quietly observing her son. The usually quiet boy now acted with self-control, and Mary realized that despite fatigue, he was learning to be a useful part of the group while protecting a small section of the camp, the shelter and rights the group needed. This small change, sparked by Sarah trusting him with Agnes, created a meaningful connection: trust, responsibility, and hope coexisting, potentially leading to long-term changes in how the group operated in this harsh society. You reminded yourself that everything happening today, from receiving bread, observing Sarah protect her child, to William realizing the value of his name, were important steps. They were not grand, but enough to open possibilities for survival and hope for tomorrow. As your group slowly moved toward the steps, each step was carefully considered, just as when they first approached St. Andrew's, not only to avoid slipping or wasting energy, but to hold position, to protect themselves and those around them. Upon arrival, you realized that the familiar space of the workhouse today seemed strange. The newcomers had taken most of the best spots, but thanks to Elizabeth's skillful arrangement and William's initiative, your group still secured a space large enough to sleep overnight. The cold outside still seeped through the cracks, but here, within the small confines of the steps, you felt collective warmth, the sense that in this harsh world, your group could survive through intelligence, observation, and unity. Hannah curled up on the steps, hands clutching the bag of bread, careful not to let the rain wet the precious food. Looking around, you realize that small efforts, from sharing bread, protecting children, to reclaiming a spot on the steps, were weaving a temporary safety net. It was fragile, but still hope. You quietly observed William, noticing that his name had become a symbol of character, a sign that he was no longer Mary's boy, or the nameless one. He could stand independently, carry out small responsibilities, and most importantly, he was learning to protect others. In a world where everything was fragile, recognition of identity became as important as material survival. The rain outside temporarily ceased, night fell, and the pale yellow light from the camp lamps shone on tired but determined faces. You realized that, although tomorrow would still be full of challenges, today the group had achieved an important step. Bread was distributed, children were protected, a temporary refuge was reclaimed, and the most vulnerable recognized the value of themselves and each other. In the chaos of London, where power, wealth, and morality were always defined by the stronger, your group found a way to survive through intelligence, courage, and cooperation. And as you took a deep breath, tasting the bread in your bag, you knew that these small victories, these careful and calculated steps, were the foundation for survival. The rain might return, the night might deepen, but hope remained in wise actions, mutual respect, and the ability to hold on to the most precious things, names, character, and survival, in a cold and cruel world. Scotty sat down next to Elizabeth, her thin body almost folding into the thin coat she wore. Despite her tattered appearance, her eyes shone with sharpness and determination, as if every moment spent wandering had honed an extraordinarily keen survival instinct. You couldn't take your eyes off her, both amazed and admiring the way she maintained her existence in a harsh environment while still preserving fragments of the past. Subtle words, confidence, and the ability to read the people around her. Elizabeth watched Scotty for a while, her eyes sparkling with understanding. 3 days without rest, 3 days in the camp, she murmured, as if reminding herself of the long-standing, unspoken rules. It wasn't an excessively harsh punishment, but for the crawlers, it was a lesson in the limits of strength and endurance. You could see every tired muscle, every harsh line on her face, all telling the story of long days of struggle, hunger, relentless rain, and wordless moments of despair. Mary placed her hand gently but firmly on Scotty's shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice both soft and serious. Scotty nodded, though clearly exhausted. "Okay. Temporary okay," she replied, her voice hoarse, like someone who had just weathered a storm and still couldn't breathe. No further explanation was needed. Mary understood that 3 days of hard labor was a harsh but necessary exchange to maintain the right to live, at least for one dry night on the steps. You looked around and noticed your group gradually adapting to Scotty's presence and the other newcomers. The initially wary glances had softened, giving way to careful observation and a conciliatory attitude. This was an important skill in the life of crawlers. You couldn't extend trust too quickly, but you also couldn't live entirely in isolation, because every day, small connections with others could mean the difference between life and death. Hannah curled up near you, arms wrapped tightly around herself, eyes glancing at Scotty. "She looks different," she whispered. You nodded, realizing that the difference wasn't just in appearance or clothing, but in attitude. The way Scotty stood firm against storms, the way she communicated, the way she never let anyone see her completely break down. While many had passively accepted their fate, Scotty knew how to protect herself, how to reclaim small measures of power in a world that seemed to have no place for such things. James, still holding the bag of bread, turned to Elizabeth. "Do you think she'll last long?" Elizabeth didn't answer immediately, her eyes still following Scotty, observing every gesture, every breath. After a moment, she said, "She knows how to survive, but like everyone else, it will take more than personal skill. Assistance, small agreements, and a bit of luck are equally important." Her voice was gentle but sharp, emphasizing that in this environment, individual talent alone was not enough. You realized this was a lesson not just for Scotty, but for everyone struggling on the steps. a reminder of symbiosis, compromise, and the ability to rely on each other while maintaining personal dignity. Scotty quietly observed the surroundings, her gaze stopping on William and Sarah. You could see a small spark ignite within her, curiosity and assessment. The boy, now named, was carefully protecting Agnes, keeping a reasonable distance, yet close enough to support. Sarah was tired, but her expression remained resolute. She was not just a mother, but a small warrior, steadfast amid the sea of people and harsh rules. Scotty seemed to acknowledge this, a slight nod as if confirming respect. In the world of crawlers, respect was sometimes more precious than bread or temporary shelter. As night gradually fell, you watched your group arrange their sleeping spots on the damp steps. The air was quiet, only soft breaths and warmth from the gathered bodies. Elizabeth quietly stood, moving around the group, checking everyone, ensuring that each person's position wasn't compressed and that everyone had a minimum space to turn. Every action she took was calculated, both skillful and necessary to minimize risk, while maintaining the camp's principles, where chaos could erupt with a single lapse. Mary sat near William, her hand resting on her son's shoulder. "Tomorrow will be different," she said, voice low and steady. You could see she was emphasizing that caring for Agnes at the market, despite risks, was still an opportunity for both Sarah and the Buller and responsibility to balance self with others. As you chewed the last piece of bread, its sweetness sinking into every small morsel, you realized that in moments like these, hope still existed, and small actions today could create significant change for tomorrow. Scotty burrowed into her coat, eyes half closed, but you knew she was still listening to every sound around her. The newcomers, whose initial suspicious glances had softened, and a temporary sense of community emerged. Not complete peace, but a fragile balance, where everyone temporarily yielded to one another, all taking refuge within an unspoken order. In the world of crawlers, that fragile state was the only thing that could be called safe. As darkness enveloped the steps, you closed your eyes, sensing the bread in your stomach, the warmth of the people around you, and an unusual certainty that today, at least today, your group had survived. Simply surviving, but surviving within this fragile order was more precious than anything else. Tomorrow, everything might change. The rain might return, challenges might strike, but now, with a small hope sprouting from past actions, you felt a rare moment of peace amid the dark sea of life. Scotty's story continued to draw you into an entirely different world, where a family once prosperous could quickly fall into poverty if careless. She walked slowly, each step cautious, as if her entire body reminded her that every step was part of survival. Listening to her talk about the bank, the lawyer, and the unchecked checks, you sensed the irony saturated in her Scottish accent. From the high floors of financial security down to the cold steps of St. Giles, the distance was not only geographical but also a spiritual chasm, where any small mistake could lead to total collapse. When she mentioned the $2,000, her eyes flickered with something like regret, but also carried a lost pride. "We thought we had everything under control," she said, her voice low, but not complaining. You recognized a subtle difference in Scotty. She did not deny her mistakes, but she also did not allow failure to crush her. This was rare among those who had lived on the steppes, where despair often made people curl inward, losing all sense of individuality. You listened, walking beside her, eyes tracking every movement around. Drury Lane was bustling in the morning, but for Scotty, every sound could be a signal. The rolling of wheels, vendors' calls, footsteps on wet stone. She seemed aware of every potential danger, a survival skill honed through months of living on the streets. Even in this moment, with no rain or police presence, you could feel the simmering tension, as if her body were continuously preparing for every scenario. Her next words made your heart ache. "My husband, he didn't understand money management," Scotty continued, her voice tinged with mild bitterness. "I trusted, we followed the plan, and then there was nothing left." Her story was a vivid reminder that anyone, regardless of background or education, could be crushed by life without preparation and vigilance. You realized that what made her resilient was not just the failure, but the way she learned from it, how she maintained dignity despite losing everything. Mary stood nearby, quietly observing, as if ensuring that the bitter stories did not become a burden on your mind. She understood that in this world, tales of loss and injustice must be heard, but cannot bind the listener's actions. Elizabeth walked alongside, eyes scanning the streets, tracking every corner, every other wandering group, identifying potential threats and possible allies. Small actions like choosing a path, avoiding wet streets, or walking beside a stronger person were all strategic. Scotty continued recounting the days she struggled to find shelter, the times she was pushed off awnings, punished at Merillion for taking refuge too often. She did not speak in a tone of complaint. Instead, there was determination mixed with a touch of sardonic humor. 3 days of hard labor just for one dry night, she shrugged, as if describing a darkly humorous joke of fate. You smiled softly, yet inside, a chill ran down your spine. This was the reality for those living on the margins, where nature, law, and human cruelty intertwined. When the two of you reached a quiet corner on Drury Lane, Scotty stopped, eyes toward the street. I've lost everything, but there's still something left to hold on to, she said, her gaze full of determination. You realized that despite all challenges, the most valuable thing she still held was not money or temporary shelter, but dignity and the ability to make her own decisions. In the world of crawlers, this was the only thing that could protect you from absolute cruelty. You looked at her, noticing the contrasts within her, frail but strong, weary but alert, experienced yet curious. This opposition made her a living symbol of adaptability, a life lesson for your entire group. You thought of William, the boy who had found himself through a name, of Sarah, the mother fighting to hold her family together, and suddenly realized that Scotty was also seeking to reclaim herself through every step, every small action, every subtle defensive choice. When you and she returned to the steps, everything seemed quieter. The passersby had become busier, but the atmosphere within your group remained a temporary safety. Scotty quietly smiled at you as she accepted the cracked teapot, as if acknowledging a small act of kindness without yielding her dignity. You saw in this moment, amid the cold, damp, and hard stone steps, there was still room for mutual respect, for fragile but necessary bonds. Elizabeth looked around, recognizing small signals from other wanderers, and reminded everyone to maintain order while also alerting Mary to carefully watch over William and Agnes. You observed Scotty sitting down, hands busy with her worn waterproof coat, and realized that she was not only surviving, but also trying to leave her mark in a world that seemed to want to forget everything: people, stories, and even small values like dignity and self-respect. You sighed, both tired and admiring. Scotty was living proof of the strength of will and survival ability, while around her remained cruelty, instability, and unnamed challenges. Even when dawn broke and a new day began, you understood that this was only a part of the long chain of days where every small decision, every subtle action could alter fate or preserve life. Amid the mixture of a painful past, a cold present, and an uncertain future, you saw a flicker of hope, nurtured by the intelligence, vigilance, and steadfastness of those who had walked the steps of St. Giles. You stood on the steps, watching Scotty tread carefully, her eyes lost in the expanse of morning London. The surroundings were still hazy, gray walls, dried mud on the sidewalks, but now there was another kind of light filtering through, not from the sun or street lamps, but from the small glimmer of hope beginning to emerge. A job, even if only 2 hours a day, was a ticket out of the endless cycle of the steps, out of dependence on charity or leftover bread. Scotty knew its value. She nodded slowly, as if she had just made a decision more important than mere survival, the decision to trust in opportunity. This feeling overpowered the fear she had carried for so long. When she returned to the steps, walking lightly but with certainty, everyone around noticed a difference in her demeanor. Hannah, always wary, lifted the corner of her mouth in a faint smile. Elizabeth quietly observed, her gaze warm as if understanding an invisible signal. Scotty was no longer outside the circle of survival. She was finding a way to reclaim her position, even from the shattered pieces of her life. Mary, from behind, held your hand tightly, a subtle expression of joy and reassurance, a belief that even in difficulty it was possible to move forward with purpose rather than merely exist. Scotty sat down on the steps, removed her gray coat, and carefully spread it beneath her, turning the worn garment into a temporary cushion. Every stitch, every tear seemed to carry a history of pain, but also survival. You realized that for her, every object was a tool for survival and a symbol of remaining dignity. What was most precious was not material things, but the ability to make decisions, the capacity to protect oneself from the cruelty of the outside world. Sitting beside Scotty, you began to listen more. She spoke of her days in London, when her hands could not hold a needle, her eyes could not see stitches clearly, and opportunities seemed to pass cruelly by. But in her voice, there was no complaint. Instead, there was sharp intellect, a subtle analysis of the chain of events leading to collapse, trusting her husband, trusting the wrong lawyer, losing her job, losing her home, losing even her dignity. Scotty's story was a vivid lesson on the fragility of social order and the hidden cruelty within structures of power, whether in a bank or a modest inn. You realized that the cold, hunger, and enforced idleness were not the worst part. It was the feeling of having one's autonomy stripped away. Scotty emphasized this with rare passion. She would rather have blistered hands from hard work than sit idle, enduring precariousness, suffering the sensation of being abandoned, powerless. This was a mindset entirely different from most of the crawlers on the steps. They surrendered, accepted the silent passage of days, but Scotty burned with the energy of a suppressed purpose, always seeking a way out of the cruel cycle of poverty. As the two of you approached the cafe, every small detail mattered. Dim light, an open door, the smell of tea, Mr. Parker's footsteps, all were signals of opportunity, of the boundary between failure and a new path. When Scotty heard the offer to work in the afternoon, consideration was visible in her eyes. Part self-respect, part survival determination, all combined to decide she would accept. 2 hours, 6 pence. But for her, it was an entire beginning, an opportunity to assert herself without relying on others' charity. You witnessed a rare sight, a small but profound joy in recognizing opportunity. Scotty carefully retrieved her gray coat, preparing for work, yet her face retained its old dignity, never lowering herself. She knew that entering Mr. Parker's house was not bowing to anyone, but a strategy to reclaim control of her life, subtly and intelligently. The brief relief in her voice when saying, "Thank you," was a rare display of openness, but you immediately noticed that this gratitude did not make her weak, it made her stronger. As Parker went inside, steam rising from the tea, you and Scotty stood silently on the sidewalk, reflecting on what had just occurred. An opportunity had appeared from an unexpected place, in a harsh city, where every small action could determine fate. In that silence, you felt the rhythm of survival at work, where hope and reality, dignity and necessity blended into a fragile yet essential balance. When you and Scotty returned to the steps, the scene was still gray and cold, but something had changed. You saw William sitting beside Sarah, talking animatedly. The boy who had often seemed gloomy now appeared brighter. The faint enthusiasm in his eyes reflected the spreading hope. Opportunity was not just for adults, but could also reach the young learning to face the world. Every story, every small action, from sharing bread to taking a backstage job, became a link in the chain of survival. You looked around and realized that the steps were not only a place of physical shelter, but also a space creating spiritual connections, where hope, dignity, and survival strategy coexisted. Scotty, with all her determination, intelligence, and self-respect, was living proof of this. Through her story, you understood that in this harsh world, hope could be dangerous, but without it, there was nothing left to continue. And with every small opportunity, like the work at Mr. Parker's or the old coat, those on the steps still found ways to rise, assert themselves, and keep a bit of light amid the surrounding darkness. You and the group looked at each other in a rare moment of silence as the policeman departed, leaving behind the lingering tension on the steps. An hour, seemingly short, but for those living off every step, every small dry corner, this time carried life or death significance. William stood up, moving with his usual agility, eyes sparkling with a new purpose. The boy understood that rare opportunities like this waited for no one. Sarah held her son's hand, emphasizing with her gaze, "Be careful, be cautious, but do not be afraid." Scotty sat back down beside you, still gripping her gray coat, a symbol of self-reliance and remaining dignity. She quietly observed the friends around her, noticing subtle reactions. Elizabeth still held the role of conductor, gently pouring tea, serving each small cup with her habitual patience. Mary moved between the steps, guiding others to find temporary shelter. Hannah, despite heavy coughing, still tried to stay upright, vigilant against any space that might be encroached upon. Each person had their own role, and in this unexpected coordination, you realized a sophisticated survival network was forming. Scotty took a deep breath, her voice deeper than usual as she spoke. We need to choose a safe place, at least until the inspection is over. A dry spot unnoticed where everyone can rest for a while. Her suggestion was not a command, but a sharp observation honed through many days of survival. You nodded in agreement. In moments like this, leadership did not come from authority or age, but from the ability to recognize danger and propose quick, careful solutions. The others quickly moved, seeking hidden corners near the steps in the narrow gaps between walls or under small eaves. William pulled Agnes along, his eyes cautious yet full of determination. He had understood that any shelter was an opportunity, not just to survive, but to nurture hope. His steps were light but firm, as if practicing a new skill, surviving while maintaining dignity. You watched Scotty, clearly seeing her movements. She observed the group while keeping a safe distance, yet never felt isolated. Her eyes scanned each street corner, each passing figure, identifying potential threats. She knew that attention here could not lapse, and any mistake could lead to the loss of what was most precious: a blanket, a step corner, or the opportunity for tomorrow's work. Scotty's pride would not allow her to falter before hardship. At the same time, her caution served as a shield, protecting everyone around her. Time passed, each minute carrying a sense of tension and uncertainty. Above London, gray clouds thickened, signaling rain could strike at any moment. Elizabeth quietly laid down the remaining thin blanket in the driest spot, reminding everyone to keep warm. Mary whispered to William that if he needed to, he could lean against the wall behind to avoid the wind. This scene, ordinary to outsiders, was in fact a delicate blend of survival strategy, friendship, and subtle care, a hidden network helping everyone preserve a fragment of hope amid London's cruelty. You turned to Scotty. She lowered her head, quietly adjusting her gray coat, lifting the flap of her bag to check that her papers and small amount of money remained intact. A faint relief flickered in her eyes as everything was still as it should be. For Scotty, every small detail mattered. Losing a button, a shilling, or a note could mean losing the chance for work or a day of survival. And in that moment, you realized the ability to preserve these small details was the key to maintaining control over life, even if that life consisted only of 2 hours of afternoon work or a dry blanket. The brief calm was interrupted by Hannah's soft laughter as she tried to hide a persistent cough. You noticed that the anxiety had never completely disappeared, but now it was balanced by fragile hope. William, with the market work and his mother's help, walked with noticeably more confidence. Each step he took was proof that even small opportunities could change fate if seized properly. Scotty stood up, reminding you that she needed to prepare for the accounting work the next afternoon. Though the details of preparation were still vague, it was clear she had planned, a further testament to her survival intelligence. Elizabeth watched her figure recede, exclaiming, "I hope she doesn't spend all that little money on clothes." But you knew Parker did not care what Scotty wore, and the most important thing was how she grasped the opportunity, preserved her dignity, and began to rebuild her life. Pride was the last thing one could not let go, Mary said, and you understood completely. In this situation, pride was more valuable than food, warmth, or any tangible thing. It was motivation, a guiding light, and a boundary keeping a person from falling into complete despair. On the steps of the poorhouse, amid impending rain and chilling wind, the threads of hope and dignity were woven through small actions: a coat, a cup of tea, a simple but sincere blessing. And you realized that it was precisely these small details, combined with the subtle coordination among individuals, from Scotty, William, Elizabeth, Mary, to Hannah, that created a true survival network. A network not based on power or money, but on intelligence, observation, determination, and communal spirit. In this cruel world, survival was not only about finding food or shelter, but also about maintaining faith, hope, and dignity, things seemingly invisible, yet powerful enough to change lives.